Welcome to Know the Love of Christ. All right, this is it. Welcome to chapter 12, the concluding chapter of Ecclesiastes. We discussed chapter 11 last episode and about how, we didn't think it flowed very well, but then it did.
It did, by the end.
And he, of course, ends that section, we'll say the chapter, with a little downer. But it ties right into chapter 12. It doesn't really stop a train of thought. To me, it continued right on. It shouldn't even have been a chapter break.
I agree.
All right, so the last 14 verses of this book, Stephanie's going to read for us.
All right. So, starting in verse 1 in the English Standard Version. Remember also your Creator in the days of your youth, before the evil days come and the years draw near, of which you will say, I have no pleasure in them. Before the sun and the light and the moon and the stars are darkened, and the clouds return after the rain. In the day when the keepers of the house tremble, and the strong men are bent, and the grinders cease because they are few, and those who look through the windows are dimmed, and the doors on the street are shut, when the sound of the grinding is low, and one rises up at the sound of a bird. And all the daughters of song are brought low. They are afraid also of what is high, and terrors are in the way. The almond tree blossoms, the grasshopper drags itself along, and desire fails, because man is going to his eternal home, and the mourners go about the streets. Before the silver cord is snapped, or the golden bowl is broken, or the pitcher is shattered at the fountain, or the wheel broken at the cistern, and the dust returns to the earth as it was, and the spirit returns to God who gave it. Vanity of vanity, says the preacher, all is vanity. Besides being wise, the preacher also taught the people knowledge, weighing and studying and arranging many proverbs with great care. The preacher sought to find words of delight, and uprightly he wrote words of truth. The words of the wise are like goads, and like nails firmly fixed are the collected sayings. They are given by one shepherd. My son, beware of anything beyond these. Of making many books there is no end, and much study is a weariness of the flesh. The end of the matter all has been heard. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. For God will bring every deed into judgment with every secret thing, whether good or evil.
All right, so I said how it continued on, because if you recall in chapter 11, verses 9 and 10, it says, Rejoice, O man, in your youth. We talked about how childhood and youth are vanity, and then he goes right into okay, so remember God, remember your Creator in your youth, because the difficult days are coming. Like in verse 8, all that is coming is vanity. And we talked how that was old age.
It's like this principle that we see about choosing God early. And we don't think about it much. Oh, children are young and innocent, and they're in a safe condition. They're not saved because they don't need saving. They're innocent and they're pure. But you look at 1 Timothy 1:5, where Paul praises Timothy and the faith that was first in his mother and his grandmother, and he's had from an early age because he was taught. And so as parents, we need to teach them. But even as children, we do have a choice. We have a choice whether to invest in those things. And we need to instill that in our children, because at that point we're not weighed down by the Hevel. We have this unburdened view of God. And so we have the opportunity to taste God without any of the tainted world, so to speak, because it doesn't affect us yet. And I think about it, when we talk about our faith and how we want to build that so that when trials come, we aren't building our faith as the trials hit us, because it's so much harder. We need to have that deep foundation. And so I think this touches on that. Remember your Creator in the days of your youth. I do think that this is talking about an older youth, maybe one that would be enjoying the pleasures of the world, tasting those things for the first time. But I do think it applies to younger youth as well, because that foundation has to be established so that when the things of the world do start influencing us, we aren't carried away by them. And the Hevel isn't so heavy that it's too much of a burden and we don't have enough foundation to lean on, that it'll just sweep away our faith at that point. But also, having this knowledge before we hit that point where we understand the world more in the sadder ways makes it easier. Having God to lean on makes it easier. Not having God, I don't know how atheists do it. And I know people say that all the time, but not having God to fall back on in that time, like you're at the mindset that the author is here, like, it's all worthless.
Mm-hmm.
What's the point? Life is temporary. Why even bother? Why not just do what I want? Because it doesn't matter anyway. In a very ungodly way. It's easy to adapt that attitude when you don't have something to fall back on, when you don't have people around you that are going to invest in you and teach you to have that mindset. Because even if they are in a safe condition, the earlier children learn these things and form these opinions, which should be their own, but the earlier they learn the truth about God, the easier it will be for them.
Yeah, because it's like he's saying, because this is going to happen,
Yeah.
And he goes on to use a lot of metaphors of the human body breaking down, life breaking down, basically, and enjoy your youth, do what you can while you can, but remember your Creator, like, not just because he's going to judge you, like verse 9 says God will bring you into judgment, but because you want to enjoy the life he gave you, because he gives it abundantly, but you want your life revolving around him. And so what we do to enjoy life, he should be the center of that, because you're going to become old, because I know you're going to become old, and some of the things you want to do you can't do like you could
get up without sighing.
Without it creaking and popping and everything else and hurting, that you just can't do like when you were younger.
Right. I also thought, it's very easy to forget God when things are good.
Yeah, so it made me think of 2 Peter 1:9. It says, "For he who lacks these things is short-sighted, even to blindness, and has forgotten that he was purged from his old sins." We get so wrapped up in life that we can forget what it's about, and we can get caught up in the Hevel
and our kids see that.
Yeah.
But 2-8 talk about bleak. You go from this high of youth to the depression of old age, all that's bad about aging, and just, it's a depressing picture. But I think about like all these things that it's alluding to, the things that we enjoy and the things that we do, and all the things he told us to enjoy, like they are lost in old age. We get to that point and they are no longer something to enjoy. They're a burden.
Yeah, like verse 1 says, I have no pleasure in them.
Yeah.
It's commonly understood, believed,
interpreted.
Yeah. Okay, so the verse 3 is kind of obvious, right? In the day when the keepers of the house tremble and the strong men bow down. We know that, older men, we see, even women, we don't mean men, but mankind, they kind of stoop down, have to use a walker or whatever. When the grinders cease because there are few, and those that look through the windows grow dim. So that's kind of like, I understood this to be, the grinders to be the teeth, and the windows, your eyes, they grow dim. You don't see as well.
Yeah, that could be one interpretation. It could be.
That's how how was when I was reading this, because I was like, wow, this is, I'm not losing my teeth, but my vision's not as good as it was.
Yeah.
And when the doors are shut in the streets and the sound of grinding is low, when one rises up at the sound of a bird. I want to go into specifics only because that's how I saw it. And rising up early at the sound of the bird. Oh my goodness. I try to sleep late now. Cannot do it. And there's this songbird, which I don't mind waking up by him. But we also have this chicken somewhere near my house. And I can hear him, a rooster, crowing in the morning. Anyway, all the daughters of music are brought low, and when they are afraid of height and of terrors in the way, that part I don't know. I don't understand that, but in verse 5, when it says, when the almond tree blossoms, the grasshopper is a burden, and the desire fails. For man goes to his eternal home, and the mourners go out about the streets. So this is, I don't know if you know, but the almond tree blossoms in the winter. So what happens in the winter? It's not my favorite season. If you don't know me, I don't like the winter. I don't like being cold. I don't like not having plants. I don't like not being here. So things are dead. It's cold. It's dead. So when the almond tree is blossoming, it's at a time where you don't go outside to enjoy it. You're not. It's just at the end. Not necessarily the end of life, but the older
Toward
years.
the end,
Yeah, the much older years. It's where the grasshopper, which is something that's so lightweight, is even a burden. So like things that bother me now, and I'm talking because I'm much older than you.
It doesn't feel that way.
The things that bother me now, which wouldn't bother me back then, has killed the desire. The desire failed. It's just a disappointment, I guess you could say. When we were talking before, I used the example of when my kids were little, if they went out and spent the night at my parents' house or, at their grandparents', I was like, oh, okay. Well, yeah, I can.
Or if you're like me, like, yes!
It's like I get, a night to myself, or maybe me and my husband have a night. But now they're moved out, and that's a big burden to, like, it's a disappointment. I'm glad they're grown. I'm glad they're on their own. I'm glad they're dependent, because that's how I wanted them to be. That's how I raised them to be. But they're gone. They're living their own lives, and that's, the grasshopper is a burden to me. That's lightweight. So, it's just different. It's you have to experience, like you've said a couple of times, experience is the best teacher. How you say?
Yeah, experience is the teacher I could never be.
Yeah. And to continue that in that verse, that train of thought, for the man goes to his eternal home, and the mourners go about the streets. It's like, this is it. You're coming close to the end. You're going to die. Even though I'm, Lord willing, could live another 20, 30 years, it's still not like when I was young. It is the winter. Okay, it's the fall.
I was going to say, you're not winter yet, Dee.
It's the fall of my life.
Don't dig your grave yet.
But, I can so relate to this, in verse 6, it says, well, New King James says, remember the Creator before the silver cord is loose. ESV doesn't have remember the Creator. And in New King James, it is in italics, which means it wasn't in the original language. So it could be read either way. So anyway, it says, remember the Creator before the silver cord is loosed and the golden bowl is broken and the pitcher shattered at the fountain or the wheel broken at the well. A lot of people think, it's the actual physical body, which it is, but it's a silver cord being the spinal cord, the golden bowl being the brain, the pitcher being the urinary tract, or the wheel broken at the well. I'm not sure what people think that is.
I think heart failure.
Oh,
for
really?
that one, I think. Possibly.
Oh. Well, I didn't take it that way. I took it as the silver cord is loose as the tongue. Our ability to communicate is just not the same.
Or if it's loose, you know how people that are older can't seem to...
No filter?
Yeah, the no filter. Their tongue is loose.
Because they lived this long. They have to hold back. Or the golden bowl is broken, while some people think it's the brain. I think it's the mind, not so much the brain.
Which, some people take that synonymously. It's not necessarily, but...
Yeah, but like the workings of the brain.
I guess so. Which, your mind goes if your brain goes, typically.
And so the pitcher shattered at the fountain. What does a pitcher do but hold water or liquid or whatever? And if that is shattered at the fountain, it's good for nothing. It's like the whole thing, the whole body itself, not necessarily a urinary
Well, I mean, and
issues.
if you think about that culturally speaking, at that point, if you had walked the pitcher to the fountain, you would have to turn around with nothing and go home and get another one to come back to refill. So,
and then the wheel broken at the well. I guess that's the little spindle thing that you roll the car. But I didn't take it. I took it as the wheel, the feet, like to action. I guess it could be the wheel too, because it brings the bucket down into the water. It's performing an action. But I took it as the feet, as action. You just can't do the things like I used to go on mission trips. I can't go on mission trips anymore because I have a bum back. But I just can't do that now at my age and my physical condition that I used to back then. So the wheel is broken at the well. And it's like vanity of vanities, says the preacher. All is vanity. That's how he started it off. And here he is bringing it to a close in all his quote unquote wisdom. What are your thoughts? Because I just rambled on and on.
Oh, you're good. I do think it's a physiological interpretation or illusion or whatever you want to call it. I do think that I don't really know what I think about what the things mean. But like I said earlier, I do think that it's basically saying the way that your body works and the things that you take pleasure in are no longer pleasurable to you anymore. The cultural context that I read had some stuff on it. I'm not sure that I believe that as to what the things mean, so I'm not going to mention those. But it does say in verse 3 about the grinders, that the grinders would have been female servants or prisoners who performed the daily work of grinding grain to provide bread for the entire estate. And I was just watching something about making bread, which I mentioned before, I think in the previous episode, where I was making bread for our VBS, and it said there were laws about if a man owed you money, what you could take from him. You could take basically everything in his house except for, I think, the clothes on his back and his millstone, which was used to grind the grind the grain into flour to make his food. So even if he owed you, no matter what, that would kill him to take that away. And so this was a daily task. And so the grinder would be the grindstone. And so there it says, what did it say about the grindstone? It has ceased, or there's few. Yeah, so it could be the teeth. I don't know. But then I think because you said, I don't know about that in verse 4, when the sound of the grinding is low. Mm-hmm. So as you age, you eat less. Your body starts breaking down. You don't want to eat. That's what I thought of with that. I don't know that that's necessarily right. It's just one interpretation. But then it also said for verse 3, looking through the window, there's a familiar motif of a woman looking out the window that is beautifully represented in ivory carvings found at Nimrud, Samaria, and Arslan Tosh, in which the woman is adorned with an Egyptian wig. In literature, the woman is gazing into the distance, awaiting news of a husband or a son who has gone to war. This is possibly the basis of the metaphor used here. So I don't know what to make of that either. But those are things that I read that I considered a little bit before this. But I do think, I don't know that so much where we connect it matters so much as just the overall gist. As we age, as we get to those twilight years of our life, we are going to look back and see what all we've done and see what was really meaningful and what will last into eternity. And that might even color how we feel about these years. The things might be less pleasurable just by way of nature, but also because of the past being what it is. Looking back and not feeling fulfilled because of what we've done or what we've left undone. But yeah, so that's what I have on that. And then we move right into 9 and 10. And it's such a break there. We talk about the flow, and it's like a complete abrupt.
Yeah. And that is, remember in chapter 1, we talked about how some people feel that it's an author that talked about an author. So right. This is, you could see where.
It's exactly where you see it. We see that the author and the teacher aren't necessarily the same person here.
Yeah.
But I found something what I found really interesting in this is verse 10. And that's that the preacher sought to find words of delight. And uprightly he wrote words of truth. And I don't know if you took it this way, but the way I took that was that he was looking in his own life, like he sought to do all these things for pleasure, but what he found was the truth. He was seeking one thing. He sought out to write these words of delight, but what he brought us in the end was truth. And he did mention the delight and whatnot, but do you see that?
Yeah.
Or am I crazy?
No, now I do.
Yeah. But then if you lead right into verse 11, because it seems like, okay, like it connects kind of, but the words of the wise are like goads, and like nails firmly fixed are the collected sayings they are given by one shepherd. The goad was like a sharp stick that they would use to prod animals like goats or cattle, oxen, that kind of thing. But they were pushing them in the right direction. And so I think here, like, the wisdom goaded him. It pushed him in the right direction. And we've talked about this. If we think this is Solomon, he had the wisdom. Whether or not he applied it is a different story. And it's sad when we think about it. That wisdom was not for naught, N-A-U-G-H-T. Not for naught, because it pushed him, it honed him, it directed him here. And we have this because of that, I think.
That's why I think he wrote this in his later years.
I think so too.
He's the old man describing what's happened to him from experience, from all the other experiences.
Yeah.
And now it's like, well, here's your truth.
Yeah, but the wisdom of God goaded him to see the truth and the wisdom instead of what he wanted to see, because he wanted the pleasure to be elsewhere, because that's what he did with his life. Verse 12, it doesn't have a break there, and it says, my son, beware of anything beyond these, which is talking about the words of truth, the words of the wise. Let it goad you. Let it push you in the right direction. But also, he's saying we can take it too far here. Like, you can take this wisdom and become so weighed down with it. And we talked about this before. Seeking knowledge for the sake of knowledge is Hevel. Like, knowing these things, if you don't apply them, it means nothing. It does you no good. And so I think the motive has to come into focus here. I love the end of that, of making many books. There is no end, and much study is a weariness of the flesh. It's all Hevel, as is everything. But it made me think about Acts 26 and 24, where Festus talks to Paul and he says, much learning has made you mad.
Yeah. And so here we are at 13 and 14.
Yes.
The whole book is hinged on this.
Yes.
It reads, let us hear the conclusion of the whole matter. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. For God will bring every work into judgment, including every secret thing, whether it is good or whether it is evil. This is it. You can't say much more about that.
if you condensed the whole book,
it's right there.
It's right there. That would be the thesis of the book.
Yeah.
The anchor.
It's almost like he was thinking about it and says, you know why? Because chapters 1 through 11.
Yeah, and in fact, when you look at the way that they have the author has set up this book, 12 reflects back what was in 1. Chapters 1 and 12 speak on wisdom and death, which are themed throughout. But really, those middle chapters 2 through 11, are about all the things that we enjoy, all that we live through. Fear God and keep his commandments. Like, this is all of it. It's kind of like Jesus saying, all of the law and prophets hang on this. When he says, the first commandment and the second like unto it, love God, love your neighbor. That's the kind of feel I get here. Just the depth and the gravity of it. It's one statement. It's so compact and so condensed. It's concentrate. And so, looking at the fear of God, what is the fear of God? If you look in chapter 3, verse 14, it acknowledges his power and his justice. And then in chapter 7, verse 18, it delivers us from sin and wickedness if we will fear him. It tells us that. And then it leads us to despise sin in chapter 5, verse 6 and verse 8, or chapter 8, verse 12. But then I think about like Psalm 111, verse 10. It's the beginning of wisdom. And then it also says that in Proverbs 9:10. But I always get kind of thrown because different translations, I want to say when I was reading through, like the end of verse 13, what it says about this being the whole duty of man. What does that mean? Like, do we take that as, because I found two different things, like the whole duty of man, like this is your responsibility, right? That's kind of how we take it. But also I think it means that it applies to everyone, everywhere, for all time. Does that make sense?
So to mankind.
Yeah. Duty to mankind.
Well,
like there isn't anyone that it wouldn't apply to.
Yeah, I agree with that. Duty is an added word. It wasn't in the original.
Oh.
So read it without the word duty. It says,
This
for
is the
this
whole
is the
of man."
whole of man.
Yeah.
So it's like everything that you are, everything that you do, every bit of mankind. I mean, this is the whole of it all, is to fear God and his commandments.
Yeah.
Keep his commandments, not fear his commandments.
All right, so that brings us to our important question at the end here, of the end of the book.
The end of the season.
The end of the season.
All right. I see the love of Christ in verse 1. It says, remember now your Creator in the days of your youth, before the difficult days come and the years draw near when you say, I have no pleasure in them. He was the Creator, Jesus, right? He was young when he died, 33-ish, that's young. He had difficult days to face. Forgetting something and remembering something is different. You can forget something, but remembering something is intentional.
Mm-hmm.
So intentionally think about, remember, pray to, talk to your Creator. So he did that his entire life. He would go away, pray. He taught. He lived it. And knowing he had difficult days ahead, he still did it. He set the example. He set the standard to that.
All right, well, I see it in verse 11, where the words of the wise are like goads. I see it that God's wisdom prompts us, sometimes painfully, but it pushes us in the right direction. And that the fact that it is even in existence for us to be goaded. I keep saying goaded. Normally we use that word like it's a bad thing. Like when you're goaded by someone, like don't let them goad you. But I think it's good here, and it's used in a good way. And he's instructed his son there, beware of anything beyond these.
And it's interesting that it says, given by one shepherd.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yes, we didn't even go into that. That would be a whole episode on its own.
Yes, it would be.
But that is where I see it. And, of course, the very last verse.
Of course.
Where God brings everything into judgment. Basically, God is just and good, and he will right every wrong. And as long as we are washed in the blood,
we're good.
It will be in our favor.
All right. Thank you again for joining us, not just for this last episode, but for this season and this study of Ecclesiastes. We hope that you enjoyed it as much as, well, we hope you enjoyed it more than we did.
Yeah, it was a very hard season for us.
It was very hard. It really was hard. It was harder for me.
But thank you for bearing with us through the season.
Thank you. We will take a break between season 4 and 5. Lord willing, we'll come back probably the end of summer with season 5. If you have a suggestion of what we can study, we have some things in mind. But if there's something that you would like to study with us, by all means, get in touch with us either through social media or our email, which again is tklocpodcast@gmail.com. And let us know if there's something that you want to study along with us. So with that said, as always, we hope that you will seek to know the love of Christ in your life. So until season 5, bye.
Bye.
If you like this episode, be sure and share it with someone. In doing so, you're sharing the love of Christ.